Hi, it's Tom here again. Just going to go through our post-op information now. And so between now and your surgery date, really important to do heaps and heaps of pelvic floor exercises. And we want to start doing them when we're moving around more. So things like getting out of chairs, in and out of the car, a couple of holds when you're walking and things like that. So starting to practice movements that are likely to cause a bit of a leak. Leading up into the surgery, the weekend before surgery, good time to do those more physical tasks around the house, mowing the lawn, hedges, washing cars, etc. Because we don't want to be lifting more than about 5 kilos for the first 4 to 6 weeks. So anything that's physical, involves a lot of reaching and things like that, is a good time to try and do that over the next little while before surgery. Hopefully you've got 2 bits of information there, which we're going to run through now. So the first one's the post-op information. So after surgery, you're going to be going home with a catheter in. So you'll be going home with a leg bag if you haven't seen one before. So a leg bag like so, Velcro straps which will go onto the leg, and then quite simple to use little toggles which the nurses will go through beforehand. Now, while the catheter's in, we don't do any pelvic floor exercises. We have a week off from the exercises. It is important you keep moving around the house. So don't lie in bed or sit still all week. Just keep pottering around. Really long walks can be a bit uncomfortable depending on how the catheter's sitting, but make sure you keep breaking up that activity across the day. The day you go to get the catheter out, we'll typically be back at the hospital that you had surgery at. And during this process can take quite a few hours. So you can be at the hospital for 2 to 6 hours, depending on how everything goes. The catheter itself will come out quite quickly with the nursing staff, but you will have to do a couple of wees before you go home. And that's what child avoid means, basically making sure that you can empty your bladder. So unless you're told otherwise, hydrate well the night before and in the morning on the way into the hospital. If you get there dehydrated, you're likely to be there just about for longer than you kind of need to be. Because you've had surgery, have drunk a fair bit of water and the catheter's been in, we're almost guaranteed to get some degree of urinary leakage on that day when the catheter comes out. So it's important to take along a spare pair of shorts, undies and pads. For that day, I'd recommend getting some of the Tina Men, the Active Fit pants, so the more pull-up style ones, just because they give you the most amount of security and protection. From there, in terms of pads, you'll probably stay in them for a couple of days until you kind of start to get a bit of a sense of the leakage. And so once you've got a bit of understanding of how the leakage is going, that's when we start to move into kind of the smaller pads. The level 3 pad will hold a fair bit of urine. The sticky part on the pads, that goes on your undies, not your old fella. That'll be quite uncomfortable, so I wouldn't recommend doing that. And then don't buy heaps and heaps of the bigger pads. Just buy a box of each to start with, and then you'll start to get a sense of the leakage, and then you'll probably start moving down into smaller and smaller pads over a little bit of time. Once you get home, or that afternoon, you can start doing the pelvic floor exercises as well. Now, it's important to note that after surgery, for the first couple of weeks before we catch up, we want to be not doing so many pelvic floor exercises. So we dial it right back to around about 3, maybe 4 sets of 10 at the most. So before surgery, doing heaps and heaps. That top kind of valve of the bladder there, that's working well. After surgery, it's not. And so if we fatigue out our pelvic floor muscles by doing heaps and heaps of exercises, then the muscles don't have as much endurance to help us with other tasks, particularly later on in the day. So we want to space them out across the day. A fairly typical pattern of leakage is in the morning. It's a bit easy to control. And as the day goes on and the muscles get a little bit more tired, lose endurance across the day, it becomes a bit more of a challenge. So we're doing less sets and reps of the pelvic floor exercises, but we're going to be using our pelvic floor muscles more functionally. So you'll quite quickly get a sense of things that are likely to cause you to have a bit of a leak after the catheters come out. So this could be things like getting off the couch, reaching for the milk, doing different movements around the home. And once you start to kind of get a sense that when I do this movement, for example, getting off the couch, I get a little bit of a leak, that's when we want to try and turn our pelvic floor on before we get off the couch. So pelvic floor on, stand up, let everything kind of stabilize, and then take a few steps and move on. Yep. It's also important that now the catheter's out and it's more comfortable to walk around to start building up into your walking. And you can typically build this up fairly quickly. If you're already walking a good distance beforehand, you can get back to close to that quickly after surgery. And you just manage how you feel. So if you're absolutely knackered, do a bit less. If you're feeling good, you can start to increase it as well. The next part on that sheet talks about getting some less sensations in the pelvic area. So some men will report that they don't get as much feeling when they do their pelvic floor exercises. And if that's the case and that's what's happening, don't panic too much. When we rescan the pelvic floor after the surgery, there's always some movement there, even for the men that report they don't feel too much. And the second thing is that you may not get clear bladder signals straight away. So normally the bladder fills up, sends a signal to the brain, and then we eventually go, I need to go for a wee. While the catheter's in, everything's just coming straight through, so the bladder's not really stretching. And then our pelvic floor's got to be strong enough to hold enough volume in there. And that can take a little while, a couple of weeks up to a month for some men. So just be aware that the signal may not come straight away. What do we do about it? We do want to try and hold on until we get a bit of a signal. But if it's been closer to 3 hours or so, you're probably due for a wee anyway. So we don't want you going into the toilet every 20 to 40 minutes to try and pee so you're not leaking. We do want to try and encourage the bladder to hold some. But if it's been a really long time, 3 hours or so, you're probably due for a wee, and it's probably good to head into the toilet at that stage. Yeah. The final sheet of paper that you'll probably have is a pad diary. And so this is how we kind of measure the objective measure of the incontinence. So we typically do this the 3 days before our review appointment. So not the whole 2 weeks, just 3 days. And what I'd suggest you do is get a pair of kitchen scales, a takeaway container, and then just get one pad fresh out of the box. So grab a pad fresh out of the box, weigh it on the scales, and just record that number. So you just put level 3 pad equals, let's say 40 grams. And then when you take it off later that day, you're going to put down the time, and let's say it now weighs 100 grams. 100 minus 40 means we've got about 60 grams or 60 mils of leakage into the pad across that period of time. And the ranges for that can vary significantly, and then we'll discuss that at our review appointment. But this gives us the best understanding of the objective leakage into the pads. So we try and do it for the whole 24 hours. You don't have to break your pads up into a certain amount of hours. You just do what you've been doing and how you've been managing your pads. If we catch up and there's a better way to manage the pads, we'll go through it then. So you just record how you're doing things at home. Yep. That gives us a really good understanding of the leakage, how things are going. If things are not quite what we expect, there can be some underlying causes for that, which we can often pick up in the pad diary. In this early stage, not too concerned about volumes in or volumes out. So you don't need to measure that too much. We're just more interested in the objective leakage into the pads. Yeah. The final couple of things to say about pads is when you do start going out about in the community, most men's toilets don't have any sanitary bins to dispose of pads. So if you are out and about and you need to dispose of a pad, do duck into a disabled toilet, and there should be a bin in there. The second thing is if you're out and about when you're doing the pad diary and you change your pad, you don't have to doggy bag it and take it home. So you can just put on the sheet, changed at shops or whatever, that's perfectly fine. And then the final one is that when you do come back into the clinic, we only need the sheet of paper. So there's no need to bring the pads in, just the sheet of paper will be perfectly fine. I hope that covers off most of the questions that you may have had. If there's anything that is not quite clear, or you have any other further questions, either before or after surgery, do feel free to send me an email. And I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. Otherwise, in the meantime, keep up the pelvic floor exercises, keep being fit and active as well as you can, and keep just touching with your mates and talking to friends and family and just doing things that you enjoy in the lead up to surgery. And then after surgery, it's a bit of recovery time, and then we get back into things once the catheter comes out. I'll see you shortly. Cheers.